Hello, welcome to this fourth installment of our discussion of adaptive leadership and adaptive change. In today's session, we're actually going to dig into the third leadership competency used by the Kansas Leadership Center that focuses on energizing others. And this is one of those that I think that a little bit of their nomenclature that I would tend to take issue with. I do think energize others might be a little misleading way to say this. I like using engaging others because in some cases, the role of the leader might be motivating and energizing people. But in most cases, it's figuring out how you can expand the work of leadership, expand leadership as a process, as an activity, part of the definition, by engaging other people. And so remember, leadership by definition is mobilizing people to solve difficult challenges. We've been talking about the difficult challenges. We've been talking about the word difficult as it pertains to managing self in leadership. And so we're going to talk now about how to engage people and begin the do part of leadership. And so it starts with you, but it must engage others. So true progress really depends on understanding who the different voices are, understanding who the unusual voices are, and identifying those voices that are connected to your issue, listening and understanding them first, getting their feedback and their opinion. So what are the unusual voices? And if you look at leadership, if you look at the different factions, and we're going to end this discussion with faction mapping, understanding those factions, you need to try to understand those voices, those groups that might have a high stake in the issue, that might be heavily benefit one way or another, be involved in this from the context of it will impact them. This challenge and work around this challenge really impacts them. But those unusual voices, while their stake in the matter is significant, their influence and their power is typically pretty low. And so trying to understand the groups of people around your challenge who have a very high stake, but have low influence and authority or power around that issue. Those are the unusual voices, and those are the ones that are often ignored, and they are the ones that you should go to first. If you're thinking about schools, if you're thinking about work around schools, the obvious unusual voice that are often have the highest stake in the matter, but often have the lowest level of influence and power are students. And that's why student voice, I think, is a major element of engaging others in adaptive leadership if you're looking at school districts, colleges, universities, any kind of educational change. So progress really depends on understanding and listening to these unusual voices. One of the other challenging elements of leadership is trying to figure out, if you are exercising leadership, where people are on issues. Because people, again, you often hear said they don't like leadership. Marty Linsky, who is a great collaborator of Ron Heifetz in the world of adaptive leadership at Harvard, talks in terms of how leadership is about adapting to a new reality. And Linsky goes further, saying that it's really about the distribution of loss. And so their argument is that people don't fear change as much as they fear loss. So trying to understand, empathize, and get in the head of some of the folks that you're working with, I think is important. Staying open-minded and being willing to change your mind. Too often when we tackle tough issues, we charge forward, giving little attention to others. This is an area that I had a lot of difficulty with, particularly when I was a superintendent, but also when I worked in community leadership. I mentioned the example of the hotel. We talked about that challenge of that hotel and disposing of that hotel. And I told you earlier that we literally did blow it up. That came about because a staff member came to me and said that there was a TV show that was willing to come in and implode the building on television for us. And we thought that was a great idea. We charged full steam ahead, but we really didn't stop to think where everyone else in the community was in terms of taking this prized jewel of the community and having it blown up on television. And so part of our challenge was there was this huge gap, as you can see in the cartoon, between where we were standing and where everyone else was. And so trying to empathize and understand where everybody was, I think, is a really delicate piece of making sure that you can make progress on adaptive change. We talked about factions, and of course, it's important to look at these factions and figure out where the overlapping interests are. You're going to see a faction map example from the Kansas Leadership Center that I think is extremely helpful. This cartoon is a really good cartoon because you can see the different factions coming to the table and looking at where challenges might exist from the very beginning around the word trust. And trust is a very significant piece of leadership. Leadership in many respects is more about process than necessarily creating the right answer. And so figuring out from the very outset, as you're starting to engage people in this work, how you create a process that's trustworthy. Because ultimately, once again, if leadership is more about process than the right answer, then a trustworthy process helps people to work together toward that right answer. If you don't have the trustworthy process, people won't work together, people won't learn together or experiment or even tolerate failure that's necessary in moving forward around adaptive challenges. And so a trustworthy process is absolutely vital as you begin to look at ways to engage people in leadership. We mentioned a good bit about the idea of leadership and authority. In creating this trustworthy process, it's important to make sure that we understand and you understand around your challenge how this process navigates this issue of leadership and authority. If you are in authority, be wary of the fact that people in authority will often try to move ahead with solutions before they really fully diagnose and before they really create trustworthy processes. So the key difference between adaptive and technical problems is that adaptive problems cannot be taken off the shoulders of people by those in authority. And oftentimes people in authority will try to do that. Solutions are only found when you get people to embrace what you're doing and change their ways. And so that navigating that difference between leadership and authority is very tantamount to making progress on adaptive challenges. Sometimes people in authority really don't want to move forward, and they have to rely on other voices, other factions to effectively move forward around challenges. And so some leadership scenarios where groups of people in a community, in an organization move forward to get people in leadership and authority, to get people in authority to move. Oftentimes those people in authority will appreciate that because it gives them the cover they need. It also creates the heat they need sometimes. And so that yin-yang relationship between leadership and authority is a really important element of the trustworthy process and how solutions can be found when people are effectively engaged around these challenges. Overcoming challenges requires change. And that is at the root of it. If you look at adaptive leadership, and Heifetz purposefully takes the word adaptation from evolutionary biology because he fundamentally believed change is something we can't stop. It's something that's going to happen. And people have to adapt to survive. And it's those folks in exercising leadership to get people to adapt to change that allows for us to move forward around the kind of challenges that are defining challenges of the moment. And so part of that requires loss, as we've already talked about in Marty Linsky's definition of leadership, and that is managed loss. Leaders, people exercising leadership, need to acknowledge loss, listen and speak to the loss, and bring people along. Draw the line between being real, but also draw the line in holding steady and not stopping. I'll go back to the hotel example that I've used countless times in our discussions here. That hotel was going to be blown up. We didn't clearly start where they were, but we had to figure out rather quickly how to bring people along, but also how to speak to the loss that many people were going to experience, and seeing this very cherished part of the community taken away and something new to be brought about. And one of the things that we did to try to speak to loss to people was we decided that about a week or two before the implosion, we would open the doors. We would let everybody in the community that wants to come and see it. And there were countless people who have had wedding receptions, who've had 13th and 16th birthday parties at the pool, who used to have Sunday brunch every week there, who saw Willie Nelson or REO Speedwagon perform in that complex, or other acts over the years because of its proximity to Nashville. So part of what we did was allow those people to come and reconcile, but we also allowed them to come and see what a filthy, awful mess this was, and how really there's not a lot that can be salvaged. And many people came out appreciating the fact that they had the opportunity to part with this, but also understanding that, yeah, maybe it's time to move on. And so that is, in and of itself, was an effective way to speak to loss. But we held steady. We didn't take up anyone who came to us saying, hey, I know someone who will fix this place up. We had a plan to move forward, to recreate the kind of community that we needed to create to birth it into the 21st century. But we spoke to the loss. So we drew that line between being real and holding steady to move people along. And so understanding collective purpose, ultimately, as you are engaging, your role is to try to ignite the imagination, to set goals and engage factions around truly what the purpose of this focus is, this change, this movement. As a superintendent, our school district was one of the districts of innovation at the state level that was given license to experiment and do innovative things, to break the rules for the sake of moving forward. We did this in a number of different programs, but it was very clear that our programs touched some of our secondary people. It touched a limited group of people in our school district. And as we wanted to brand ourselves as a district that prided itself as being innovative, we wanted to try to figure out how we could inspire a collective purpose around that word and what that meant for experimenting and moving forward educationally. And so one of the things we did was we put seed money there for any teacher in the district to apply for funding that were innovation funds to do whatever it was that they needed to do in their classroom. We set aside a significant amount of money, allowed people to write innovation grants, and we seeded innovation, classroom by classroom, school by school. We didn't hit everyone. We didn't fund everyone, but we funded a large swath of people to where more people could say they walk the walk of being an innovative district and an innovative school and innovative teachers. And so it was a way of inspiring collective purpose among the different factions that we had, and a way to engage more factions as early and as often as we could toward that idea of being a district of innovation. And so finally, as you look at energizing and engaging others, it's important to look at this faction issue and ways that you can engage these unusual voices and ways that you can focus on this collective purpose. And so it's important to really look first at the process to make sure that the process is trustworthy. And this is a tool from the Kansas Leadership Center that helps you to do that. It asks core questions about what the level of engagement is in creating a trustworthy process, but then also this tool looking for ways to identify factions around your issue, and not just identifying the factions, but you can see in the tool ways that you can identify what that faction values, where their loyalties are, what they stand to lose because of this issue, how much they care about this issue, and the degree to which you need them to be engaged. And so you can almost quantify all the different elements that need to be engaged as you move forward on these adaptive issues in your organization, your community, your school, whatever it may be. So we'll move ahead into our last competency in our final segment, and that is interventions. This is now time for action, time to do, and we'll see you then.